Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 4th of July 2014, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, it's very hot in the studio, and I can assure you that Plymouth at the moment is blue sky and bright sunshine. It's a lovely day out there. People are down by the seaside. That's absolutely untrue, of course. It's raining, grey skies, heavy mist, and I can see that quite a few people across the rest of UK are saying it's pretty gloomy. Well, if it's gloomy with the weather, all is well with the Royal Navy.
Well, indeed, because the Queen has decided. Sorry, there we go. The Queen has decided to go and name the first of the new carriers, the HMS Queen Elizabeth, and they had a wonderful ceremony this morning. The great and the good, of course, were there.
This is Rosyth in Scotland,
correct,
I believe,
that is correct.
Actually.
Yes.
So this is a dedication ceremony for a massive new warship being held in Scotland, a country which is actually saying that at the moment we're going to break away from the Union, and under Alex Salmond at least, we've got a hostile nation state.
Correct.
But we're launching, we're dedicating the aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth there in Scotland. Interesting.
But they were all there, as I say, including Mr. Hammond and who's that? Who's that?
What, the lady in white?
No, beside Hammond, with the purple tie, the common purpose tie on.
Oh, well, I think that's the Prime Minister, possibly.
Yes, but as you rightly point out, the lady in white, who's that?
Well, we think that there's a serious security breach here, and we think that there's been an invasion of Taliban.
Yes, indeed. So there we go. Is this why he's called Florence of Arabia?
It may be, but in any case, this is a serious security breach up there in Scotland. Is Alex Salmond now teamed up? Has his junta teamed up with Taliban? And there is a D on the end of that. But here he is, so-called MP, master of many disguises, and of course chairman of the Defence Select Committee now. But he's obviously decided to attend in alternative dress.
Yes, and of course Her Maj was there to name the ship, and there's George Osborne there for some reason looking on rather sullenly. I don't think he likes spending the money, but of course naturally the propaganda was out in force today, and David Cameron tweeted out this infographic telling us that 2 huge aircraft lifts can move 2 combat jets from the hangar to the flight deck in 60 seconds. And these are the type of aircraft, but unfortunately they have been grounded again for the 8th time because they're crap. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say that, of course, but that is what they are.
Well, it's quite extraordinary what's gone on here because, of course, the government has absolutely decimated Britain's carrier force, and the key thing about having carriers out of service is that the experience decays. So all of that expertise, particularly amongst the senior ranks, very, very experienced and knowledgeable technicians and engineers, a whole lot of experience lost, time at sea, the deck landings and launchings, of course, lost. So Cameron, remember, couldn't wait to scrap the carriers on the promise of these so-called super carriers. We've now got the super carrier, but of course we don't have the aircraft properly in service to get it to sea. My prediction is that you're going to see increased integration with the French Navy, and I believe that we're going to see an attempt in the very near future for mixed French and British manning on these carriers.
Well, indeed, it is mixed French and British manufacturing that is producing these carriers in the first place, because Thales is one of the Thales, yes, is one of the companies which is in the consortium, or the whatever you might call it, the consortium that's putting these things together, and there were quite a number of French and some Dutch uniforms at the event as well.
Well, I've just stunned, really. Mike was showing me just prior to the programme some of the propaganda just being pushed out with pictures of broadcast pictures of Second World War carriers, a whole massive amount of hype that here we are as a small island, but we've now effectively got the power to project globally. This was the biggest piece of propaganda that I think I've ever seen. And if I think back to my own time in the Royal Navy, I can't remember anything as appalling as what we've just seen this morning from the BBC. So pure propaganda. We've had Cameron and Blair and Brown decimate the Royal Navy in particular. We've now got these carriers, but of course, have we got the escort ships to go with them? No. Have we got a workable submarine fleet, nuclear submarine fleet? The answer to that is no. And Alex Salmond, of course, pressing for so-called independence for Scotland, which places Britain's nuclear deterrent, Trident nuclear deterrent, under threat. And perhaps it's just a coincidence that the newly formed Services TV has been pushing out a questionnaire asking service people, well, what do you think about Trident? Should we keep it or not? So
What?
I'll just say have a look at what the BBC is pushing out on this. But we've got to say, just dripping with the most appalling propaganda.
So moving on, NATO has decided that really Riga and Latvia need a strategic communications centre, and so they've set one up. This was on July the 1st, and this is the Supreme Allied Command Transformation HQ. Supreme Allied Command Transformation HQ. That's quite a title, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they have decided that they, along with Latvia themselves, Estonia, Germany, Italy, Lithuania and Poland and the UK, have all signed memoranda of understanding for the establishment of the NATO Stratcom Centre of Excellence at Riga as an international organisation. And this is in order to combat Russian propaganda, apparently.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with pushing out NATO propaganda at all.
Yeah, so we've already pointed out, of course, that the BBC, that we think of just providing the excellent high-quality programmes for consumption at home, but we've got political BBC charity Media Action, which by its own admission is helping dissent in vulnerable countries. Syria, classic example. But we've also got the BBC World Service connected in with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and doing the bidding essentially of spying on foreign media broadcasts. So one can imagine that the NATO system is going to be fully supported by the BBC, pushing out what is raw British and pro-American propaganda.
Well, apparently the next steps for the centre will be an accreditation visit by the Supreme Allied Command Transformation representatives.
Yeah, brilliant. Transformation.
Yeah.
We couldn't make this up is an expression we're often using. We don't have to make it up because it's all there. The transformation of Europe is presumably transformation into the EU superstate.
Now, of course, one of the signatories to this, as I mentioned, was Germany. Strangely, ironically, hypocritically, perhaps, Herr Chancellor Merkel in Euroactiv here from yesterday is saying that she's really against NATO expansionism, and this was a visit by the NATO Secretary General Rasmussen in Berlin yesterday, and they were having talks, and Merkel said really it was just too dangerous, and there should be a bit less of it, but let's do it anyway because we're going to sign up to expansion in various different types of ways. So don't know how you would describe that. Hypocrisy perhaps is the best word for it.
Hypocrisy. Well, if there's hypocrisy on, on that side, thanks to Russia Today here for, in fact, there's a series of photos and a clip here, but this is the new Ukrainian defense minister signing his oath. But oh dear, when some non-official photographs appeared, it was quite apparent that he was actually signing with his pen upside down and with the top of the pen still in place. Now, I don't know whether this is some sort of satanic inversion, but if you like to go to Russia Today, you can have a look at those photos yourself. You'll see this is absolutely real. Was this man so nervous at what he was doing that he didn't realise his pen was the wrong way up?
I would say that he appreciates what it is that he intends to do over the next period of time. He knows that if he signs that oath, he could not stick by it. He therefore would be breaking the law.
Yeah.
So he's gone through the rigmarole, and the photographs have been taken, and there's a claim that he signed the oath, but of course he hasn't.
Yeah.
Bit like the Queen, actually, really.
A bit like the Queen signing at the top of a document.
Well, who signs a contract at the top? So the Queen has signed her coronation oath at the top, and there's a piece of purple ribbon between her signature and the words.
Yeah. And this is the same Queen. We better mention her because she's there at the dedication of HMS Queen Elizabeth. This is the same Queen Elizabeth who has accepted mediatisation, which is basically the bulk of her powers signed away to a corrupt, fraudulent European state. But as far as the BBC is concerned, there she is doing her job, defending the nation. I'm sorry to say we're very disappointed. Well, if we're disappointed with the royalty and the state of the Royal Navy, we're particularly disappointed with Britain's politicians.
Not just the politicians, of course, with Britain's police and judiciary, I suppose, as well, because this is a story which has been doing the rounds under the surface for quite a long time, but it's finally broken the surface. This is Tory MP who is allegedly found with child porn during the 1980s. He was driving back across the Channel, obviously on a boat. When he arrived at Dover, he was apparently looking a bit dodgy, and so he was stopped by a customs officer who found the videotapes, and they allegedly carry some pretty unpleasant stuff involving children under the age of 12 taking part in sex acts. This material was passed on to his superiors by the customs officer, and quick as a flash, nothing happened. And so that MP was never arrested or charged, and that customs officer is now apparently speaking to the police under Operation Fernbridge, and we'll see whether anything happens. But strangely enough, but it's just a coincidence, of course, the original reports and the videotapes have gone missing.
They've disappeared.
They've disappeared.
Yeah. Disappeared.
Just a coincidence.
Which brings us on very nicely to this gentleman.
Well, this is a pretty incredible situation. This is the headline, really. You've got to read the article to find the absolute ridiculousn's of this whole thing. 4 new historical child abuse cases referred to police by the Home Office, says Telegraph. And what they're saying here is that a review was done of historic cases, and that 13 cases were identified, that 9 of them had been reported to the police already, but a further 4 have now been reported to the police. But the interesting point about this, Brian, is that this review was carried out by one person from HMRC. The HMRC, of course, being independent of the Home Office, completely independent, and they're not part of the civil service, clearly, and therefore they were independent enough to go and do this review. And they reviewed 746,000 documents.
Yeah, and we're going to come on to that in just a second. We thought we'd give an overview as to what's been going on in the last couple of days, and then we can put this in context. So let's have a look at a UK column wiring diagram. And we'll remember this is the man centre to things, Geoffrey Dickens, long-standing campaigner against child abuse. And we're going to say a very respected MP. That appears to be the view of good people. So what did he do? Well, November 1983, Dickens handed over a 40-page dossier on a Westminster paedophile circle involving 8 senior civil servants and politicians, 8 senior civil servants and politicians. And of course, where did that dossier go? Well, it went to the Home Secretary, Leon Brittan, who was attended at the time by Sir Brian Cubban. Sir Brian, I'm having trouble here. It's obviously Friday. Sir Brian Cubban, who was Britain's parliamentary private secretary. So here's the man of the moment, which is Simon Danczuk, and basically he has brought the whole thing to light again, and he's been speaking to the parliamentary committee, and he's asked Leon Brittan to actually explain what he did with the dossier. Now remember that in the background we've already got Cyril Smith, MP, as was paedophile, and Sir Peter Hayman, a senior civil servant, known to be a paedophile. So evidence of this type of activity going on at very high level in the Westminster establishment. If we just have a look at Sir Brian Cubbon, there's quite a lot appearing on the internet at the moment, and one of the key things is his connection with a company called Hacklet Foundation. This is a company which seems to be tied in with retirees from the security services. I'll loosely say black ops people, offices in Mayfair, but not a lot to see. There's also basically a connection between that company and a gentleman who's recently disappeared in China, which the Evening Standard has started to talk about. We'll leave you to research that. We'll show you a bit more on this in a moment. But there's also another article which has come to the surface during Liam Britton's time as Home Secretary, where there was effectively monitoring of CND activists of their phones. And of course, when this went to trial, the Home Secretary and indeed Sir Brian Cubbon had not done anything wrong, as you would imagine. So Channel 4, though, has done some very good research, and they're pointing out that on the 25th of February 2013, Mr. O'Brien emailed Britton to ask about the dossier. Britton replied that, "I'm afraid I do not recollect this." So obviously, yep, he couldn't remember anything. But suddenly, on Wednesday, the 2nd of July 2014, Britton suddenly remembers everything. He remembers that Jeff Dickens came to see him with a substantial bundle of papers, and he asked my officials to look at them. Well, your statement applies because, of course, what seems to have happened to the bundle, oh dear, it's vanished. And to bring in your point, oh, here he is, he's popped up. Well, Nick Clegg, of course, was one of, in a political sense, one of Liam Britton's European boys. And of course, it's Nick Clegg who's saying very strongly at the moment, we don't need an investigation into child abuse. So we need to watch Mr. Clegg very, very carefully, we think, because what man would say we don't need an investigation into child abuse? But let's put the rest in. So here we are. The Home Office has used an independent customs and excise person to review 746,000 abuse files. Now that number is files over 20 years.
Right.
So we're looking at tens of thousands of abuse cases coming up every year, but we don't seem to be hearing about this in the mainstream press, Mike.
Can't imagine why that would be.
No, but somebody has gone through 746,000 files.
Yeah, but it wasn't a team, it was one person.
One person. So if we assume that they spent 30 seconds on each file, roughly it's taken them 3 working years. And then they've magically come up with the fact that there's a problem with 13 cases. So if we worked out a percentage, we've got a 100% or a 99.9999, it goes on forever really, efficiency of sorting out child abuse, but we don't. So we think that what we've got is vanishing dossier of paedophiles in Westminster and a superb cover-up completed within the Home Office establishment. Or are we being cynical?
Accurate.
Well, here he is. We did show you this yesterday, but let's enjoy it. Here's Mr. Britton. He says, as he recalls, Mr. Dickens came to his room at the Home Office with a substantial bundle of papers, and as is normal practice, my private secretary would have been present. I told Mr. Dickens I would ensure that the papers were looked at carefully by the Home Office, and following the meeting, I asked my officials to look carefully at the material contained in the papers provided and report back to me if they considered that any action needed to be taken. Now, presumably, Mr. Britton couldn't read himself, so he didn't read the dossier himself. He knew it was important. He didn't read it himself, apparently, and therefore he had to pass it to officials to read it for him in order to understand whether it was or was not important. And oh dear, none of those officials thought it was important, so none of them came back to him, so he went to sleep.
No, indeed, because if he had read it, he might not have been able to deny that he had read it.
Yeah. So it's pretty worrying if we've had Home Secretaries who can't read and Home Secretaries that seem to have very unpredictable memories, particularly on the subject of child abuse. But don't worry, because our politicians are all there dressed in their smart suits and dresses and Taliban outfits in order to dedicate the largest ship the Royal Navy's ever had.
Maybe this is why the European Commission never has any audited accounts, because obviously he was a commissioner for many years.
Yes.
And maybe he just forgot.
I think probably forgot. Yeah. Well, let's just return to Leon's parliamentary private secretary, because you can find all this on the internet. But this is the company Hakluyt, if I pronounce that correctly. Directors' report, directors and their interests, and there he is, Sir Brian Cubbon. And this is the second article that we mentioned. So this is taken, I believe, from the Glasgow Herald back in 1986. Judge clears Britain over phone tap on CND leader. And the bit that was particularly interesting, it says all applications for phone tapping were funneled through Sir Brian Cubbon, the Permanent Under-Secretary of State at the Home Office. So clearly, clearly we can trust the judge, because a single judge making a decision is always to be trusted. No wrongdoing, no covering up of the paedophile allegations. So how can we perhaps put a finger on this? Let's bring back Jimmy Savile. And we've shown you all these people who didn't know that Savile was a dangerous paedophile. So none of the police officers connected with Royal Protection duties knew. None of the Secret Service knew. The Met Police didn't know. The hospitals didn't know. Gordon Brown didn't know. Tony Blair. And we understand Jimmy Savile even popped across to Israel to the Knesset at one point. They didn't know. So do we have the same situation with Cyril Smith? Nobody knew that Smith was a dangerous paedophile. So it's a bit worrying when we've got security services that are not capable of working out that we've got paedophiles in amongst the establishment, all sorts of potential security breaches there. And of course, foreign powers could be blackmailing our politicians to do their dirty work.
Do you think that people like Royal Protection officers must have some clue about what's going on?
Well, I would say that usually if you want to find out what's really happening, you talk to the body of the church, as it were. So I think the ordinary policeman, any ordinary policeman that's been involved in Royal Protection duties would almost certainly know what the hot gossip was about paedophiles close to the Queen and other senior members of royalty. So we would say, if you know any of those protection officers, perhaps some of them are retired now, it'd be very interesting to see what they knew about Jimmy Savile at the time. But this is an example of what our politicians do. Here's Tim Lawton, former children's minister, and he told Channel 4, in order to restore confidence in our child protection system, because things have got a lot better, we need an overarching inquiry that puts all of this into context and makes recommendations, so surely we can have a child protection service that is fit for purpose, and the victims must come first. All those victims, many hundreds, if not thousands, who've been suffering, 746,000 of them, apparently, going back to the 60s, 70s and 80s, they must come forward. But it's not going on now, Mike.
No.
Apart from the ones that are coming to see the UK column, apart from the victims that are talking about Beechwood Home in Nottingham, apart from the victims that are coming forward to speak to Bill Maloney from Pie and Mash Films.
Let's not forget Oxford and Sherwood Valley College. Let's not forget the people that are ending up sectioned for trying to report child abuse. So it isn't happening today in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, so we can probably trust Tim Lawton. We should certainly trust Leon Britton. We can certainly trust Nick Clegg, David Cameron, Ed Miliband. Well, we haven't heard much from him. And, yeah, we should trust them.
Now, before we move on, the chat box is saying that Rolf Harris has had 5 years and 9 months.
Right, okay.
Do you think that's an appropriate sentence?
Well, personally, I don't think the full truth has come out about what he was up to. But can we say perhaps it's a start? But perhaps we should also say, of course, that we seem to have this amazing focus on celebrities. We've moved from dirty old men in raincoats to the fact that if you're a television celebrity or a pop star and you've been a naughty boy or girl with children, well, you're going to be picked up. But at the moment, we just don't seem to be able to convict any senior members of the establishment or indeed politicians who are involved with very mucky stuff. Is there two systems of justice, one for relatively ordinary people and one for politicians?
You may say that.
Yeah, I did.
Right, moving on. Internet censorship. So this is Torrent Freak website, which is an internet news website, and they're reporting that King David's so-called porn filter is actually blocking all kinds of other kinds of websites. What a surprise! So remember that this filter is the default setting on many ISP connections, and you have to ask for it to be switched off. But of course, in order to ask for it switched off, you run the risk of being, associated with the notion that you really want to watch the porn. Never mind the other websites that you may, in fact, want to look at. So this is what they find.
Creeping censorship.
Basically. Yeah, well, it is absolutely. They find that 1/5 of the top 100,000 websites are blocked, and that's That's what is a fifth, 20%. So 4% of the total of the top 100,000 websites are porn sites. So if 4% are porn sites, that leaves 16% that are currently being blocked by Cameron's filter. And the point that I would make on this, of course, is that when we look at the activity of ATVOD, we see that they are using the adult industry in this country as the justification for regulating internet-based video content, and they've now extended that remit quite unlawfully, we believe, into other areas, including the UK column.
Yeah.
And it looks like Cameron's child protection censorship of the internet is using the same criteria or the same excuse, and really, there's no excuse for this. If they want to protect children, they can be quite specific about what sites that they want to block. If there are sites outside of those being blocked, then that's also a deliberate act, in my opinion. And
I think I'm right in saying that David Cameron, very friendly with one of the European chief executives of Google, and if you want an experience for how easy it would be to actually remove the pornography from the internet, and you haven't done this, try Googling an image of Home Secretary Theresa May. You may be surprised. So let's come in a slightly different angle here. We've got Russia Today warning about this irrelevant news disappearing from Google searches. Now, what they're talking about is people who have decided they can make use of a recent European ruling. We don't want our name, we don't want information about us to be on the internet, and good old Google is stripping it away. Well, somebody's been bleating about this, and surprise, surprise, it's Robert Peston from the BBC. So he's got a big article up saying he was shocked to receive an email from Google to say they were taking down some material because he had mentioned a person who has now asked for their internet history to be removed. And dear old Mr. Peston's got very worried that there's some sort of encroaching internet censorship. Well, we'd just like to remind people that this is the same Mr. Peston who actually got involved with the whole of the wind-up for the Leveson inquiry, which was Common Purposes, the political charity Common Purposes' attempt to help David Cameron take control of the mainstream press and media in Britain. If you look at the top left-hand corner of the diagram, in 2005, Sir David Bell, then Chair of Trustees of Common Purpose, and his Chief Executive, Julia Middleton, held a debate on media standards at Bell's Pearson offices. There were bankers present. The Bank of England was represented. The BBC was represented, of course. There were academics and there was bishops. But there was also this man. Well, here he is. It was Robert Peston, who was there at the very first meeting where clearly there was a discussion as to how to move forward in order to generate sufficient furore with a hacked-off inquiry to get Leveson in post in order to make a very crude attempt to get state control of Britain's press and media. So I think that Mr. Peston is starting to reap what he's been sowing, but if he's still living in the common purpose cloud cuckoo land as a selected future leader, I'm sure he's going to enjoy living in the European super state where you can only do what the European president says you can do. I nearly said we can't make it up. I won't do that again. Well, a little bit of good news in a way, and this was put through to us. This is the Lancashire Evening Post, that a mum had won her court battle keeping her son off school. Now, this is a very, very interesting story because the boy was at a special school, and what apparently happened was he was abused in that school. He was treated badly, but also locked in what I think was a dark room at one stage. And this ultimately caused such fear and stress. He had a disorder as a result of the treatment. The mother kept him off school. Of course, the local authority then tried to go for her, but she's been successful in her court case. Why I'd encourage you to read this article is because you will find that the school is not actually named. So we've now got anonymous schools with anonymous members of staff who can, as has been proved, treat children so harshly they end up with psychological problems, but the media is censored so that we don't know who those people were.
Even the headline's a bit offensive. Keeping scared son, like he's just a bit scared of something.
Well, a psychiatrist had said that the child was actually suffering post-traumatic stress. So that was the clinical diagnosis on the child. So you're quite right. Even the headline is twisting it. Well, Independence Day, I'm told, and we'd just like to say, well, whilst many of the top level of Americans are celebrating independence, of course, just as with Britain, terrible things happening on the streets. And this is a story which has been pushed through to us several times, that basically, after being caught, hundreds of illegal immigrants are simply being released onto the streets in Texas, where they are suffering, of course, because there's no facilities to look after them. And this is the other horrible part of it, that there's now tens of thousands of children seeking refuge in the United States. And what are they doing? They're putting them in hangars, in wire cages. So obviously a lot to celebrate with American independence. They thought they were getting clear of the British Crown, East India Company and all of the rest, corrupt City of London business. But oh dear, it looks like at the moment that the American people are still under the yoke of this vile international system.
Well, I mean, all it took was a few presidential assassinations and they were right back in there.
This is true. Now, we should have another slide here somewhere. We're going to end this afternoon on, well, it's a cheerful note, really. But we'd like to thank the person that created this video. Lies are free, truth costs money. We've noticed that over the last couple of days, it's jumped up to 3,900 hits. If you want to have a look at a little bit of black humour, you might like to look at this video where ATVOD are clearly in the bunker, very, very upset because their plans to take down the UK column have not worked. And if there's anybody out there who is German or of German origin, we've got Dobie in the chat room. This is not to do with the German people. We are talking about regimes. And if the Germans have suffered that sort of regime in the past, it's very clear that's the future for the United Kingdom unless we sort out these people. But have a look at that video. I think for most people, it will make you laugh. Unless you're at VOD, of course, in which case you're going to be a bit sad.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, 6 o'clock tonight, Doomwatch, and Alex G has, for the first half an hour, 45 minutes, Patrick Henningsen and Pete Santilli live, we hope, from the the front line of something that you'll find out about later. So we're hoping to do that. I think it's going to be an interesting section of the programme. And following that then, Alex is opening the phone lines. So details will be announced during the programme for how you contact him. But the phone lines will be open. So Dobie, you've been asking for this. I expect you to be the first in the queue.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us. We will be back on Monday the same time. Have a good weekend. Don't switch off completely. Make sure you get out there talking to people, sending some emails and putting pressure on your local MP, asking them what they are doing to help protect children against paedophiles in the establishment and Westminster. And of course, I'm still waiting for a reply to my personal email to Southwest Devon MP Gary Streeter, Conservative. Well, there we are.
Just before we go, I'll just say for Doomwatch tonight, 6 p.m. till 8 p.m, ukcolumn.org/live.
Brilliant. There we are. Have a good weekend. See you on Monday. Bye-bye.